Today we're introducing Steve Banks, musician, composer and creator of the Blue Pearl Concert, a one-world oratorio at St Giles Cripplegate on May the 14th. Welcome aboard, Steve, and thank you very much for joining us for this special interview.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you're a humanist. You stated that you're a humanist. Can you give us some idea of your route to humanism? When did you first consider yourself a humanist?
Well, I think it would be more accurate to say probably that I'm a humanist plus or something. I'm a variant of a humanist. I think. Sorry.
We do variants. No
yes. Well, there are very few institutions, aren't there, that aren't some kind of broad church in some sense, or have a width to their church, so to speak. I think from being involved with Buddhism, Buddhism is a very humanist form of spiritual path. So I think the two are very related, and I think I would say that the Buddha was a humanist. So I think it really comes from there, and it's very much in my background. My parents were brought me up with a very much a kind of a liberal think for yourself kind of upbringing. So I'm not even sure I would say exactly when I could say the start date was when I became a humanist, but I think I've been a humanist all my life, probably, in some sense.
Yeah, so many people say that, don't they? But you've obviously been influenced strongly by Buddhism. Were your parents inclined that way? Were they interested in Buddhism?
No. I was brought up essentially atheist or agnostic, certainly, but probably mainly atheist, really. So no, I found my own way into Buddhism.
You're a free thinker. I think that's a common route with humanists. Anyway, your parents are both civil servants, and I was always led to believe that music kind of runs in the family. So what led you to music? I mean, do you have any other musicians in your family?
I think my mother would not be alarmed at me saying that certainly didn't come from her side. Okay. But my father, they both, well, I think it was mainly him probably, was very keen for me and my sisters to learn instruments when we were children. And he actually started learning the cello at the age of 40 when I was starting learning the violin, and my sisters were also learning instruments. So, and then he became, fairly proficient on the cello, and it was a big part of his life thereafter, playing chamber music, and he absolutely loved it. So there's certainly something there on my dad's side.
So yeah, he wasn't a musician until his middle years, but I mean, he must have loved music all his life. I mean, you have to have that inspiration to want to play a musical instrument, to love it.
I remember him saying that he wished he had learned as a child. So I think he did singing, I think, at school and at university, and a bit of recorder playing. So he had done some, but yes, certainly I think he must have loved music. Yeah.
Okay, well, coming on to the question of spiritual music, I mean, there's been much debate and disagreement among humanists about what we mean by the term spiritual, and even whether we should use that term at all. And in fact, I have a discussion with somebody else about this just yesterday. And so that's mentioned elsewhere in the Humanistically Speaking magazine. But what do terms like spiritual and sacred mean to you, Steve? And how can sacred music be not religious?
Yeah, well, I think it's fair to say that's quite a big question. So I'm not sure how far I'll be able to get into it, but for me, my understanding of spirituality is essentially framed by Ken Wilber's integral model, which is a fairly recent development. I would say it's one of the biggest conceptual, theoretical sort of leaps forwards that have been made for generations, and as I see it, in that understanding, so he wrote his first book in 1977 called The Spectrum of Consciousness, and he created a theoretical synthesis of psychology, modern Western psychology, which only began 100 years ago with Freud, with the ancient spiritual traditions of the East. So he became known as the first world philosopher because of this integration of the modern West with the ancient East. And modern developmental psychology is a very well developed theory of how human consciousness develops from an infant through childhood, adolescence into adulthood. And it's basically a sequence of stages that have been experimented on. Like, I don't know if you know that the experiment, for instance, of when the theory of mind arises in a 6 or 7 year old child, typically, that you perform this experiment where you have two balls with a green on one side and red on the other side, and you show them, say, the red side, so the child's looking at the red side, and then you turn the balls around and you ask the child, what am I looking at? What color am I looking at now? And they don't know. So there's a certain point when they're then unable to put themselves into your perspective, the second person perspective. But past that age, they are. So they're then becoming able to think what another person is thinking. So if I just finish off with this bit, so basically you had this whole developmental theory of psychology, and Wilber, he has this incredible ability to absorb information and from many cultures and books. He's got this extraordinary knowledge. So he saw that there was a similar pattern in the spiritual, particularly in the mystics. So so you'd have a sequence of stages that you could go through if you did a spiritual practice like meditation or contemplative prayer if you're in a theistic religion. And he basically put those two together on the same map for the first time. So the analogy he used, he called it the spectrum of consciousness, and the analogy he uses is the electromagnetic spectrum. So before, I think it was Max Planck, before Max Planck came along, you had all these different phenomena like X-rays, visible light, radio waves, and so on, all with very, very different properties. So obviously X-rays and radio waves being invisible, only detectable by particular machines, extraordinarily different properties. And you would not think that they were in any way the same kind of thing. And then along came Max Planck with one of these, how does this happen, that a human being comes along and suddenly sees a connection, a pattern? And so he developed this theory, which with mathematical formula, of course, saying that all of these things were different types of electromagnetic waves. And you have the electromagnetic spectrum, and they have different frequencies and different wavelengths, but they have this underlying unity. So you have a theory which creates a unity out of a diversity. And that's basically what Ken Wilber has done. And he started off doing exactly that with psychology and spirituality, but it kind of went on beyond that. So he actually connected all fields of human knowledge in this map, which sounds like a very grandiose sort of thing, but it's just a theory. That's all. Just like Max Planck's theory of electromagnetic waves, it's just a theory. And anyway, so for me, spirituality then became something which is absolutely within the realms of rational understanding. It's not, spirituality is no longer this sort of about a God up in the sky, or about a man born of a virgin, all those things which I couldn't possibly subscribe to. Spirituality then becomes basically a series of experiments. If you sit in meditation, see what happens to you. If you sit very still and observe your thoughts, see what happens.
Well, I mean, I think that's absolutely fascinating. You speak with some passion,
Yeah,
Steve.
I am.
I must say, to my shame, I haven't read any Ken Wilber, but I assure you, I will be reading some Ken Wilber in future.
I
I
would
mean,
recommend it, yeah.
the underlying message seems to me a kind of sense of connectedness that we all have with the universe, with everything, and that we are part of what we observe. And I think that's very important.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was just fascinating, Steve. Thank you very much for that. I'm sure our readers will appreciate that. Now, you say, just pulling back a little bit, you've kind of half answered my next question, but I'm going to go and say it anyway. You say that science and rationality is where truth was to be found, and I agree with that. But you've chosen to be a musician and a composer, which, although I can understand, has its own science and rationality in production, but music serves the emotions. Aren't the emotions by definition irrational?
Yeah, I was struck when I saw that question when you sent it to me. Yes, I sort of agree with that, but the emotions and rationality are all part of one psyche. So, you know, psychology, the etymology of that word, the psyche is probably hard thing to define, but it's somehow a composite of our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs, and so on. So and logos, of course, being reason or pattern, or so psychology is the pattern of the psyche. So, you know, when you study psychology, and indeed when you experience psychotherapy, you experience these patterns in your own psyche, you know, these kind of, which are beautifully represented by all those wonderful myths of the Greek pantheon, these kind of archetypal stories that unfold in our lives. And we all have unique versions of them, and yet there are patterns. Yeah. Clearly, like you know, what's his name, when he flew up to the sun and, you know, his wings melted. And
was that Mercury? No,
no, it's Daedalus, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it.
He flew up. He thought he could fly as high as he wanted, and his wings melted, and he crashed down into the sea. Yeah, which has been beautifully represented in a painting, I remember. But anyway, that's just one story, isn't it, of hubris and the pride before a fall. But and we have tragedy and comedy, all these kind of archetypal patterns of the psyche. And I would say the same of music. So rather than saying that music is about the emotions, I would say that music is about the psyche. So and the music in the forms of music that I like anyway, because I don't like all forms of music, music is a synthesis of structure and emotion. So if, for instance, if you take sonata form that Beethoven or Mozart wrote in, you know, you start out on a journey with a theme, and then you have a little bit more kind of an interlude, then you have a second theme which contrasts with the first theme, and that's all called the exposition. It's like, okay, this is where we begin our journey, and you get a bit familiar with these themes, and then you get to what's called the development in sonata form, where these themes are suddenly start to be transformed, and you find yourself changing keys, and it might change from major to minor, and it becomes turbulent. Usually there's a sense of turbulence and unease, something, uncertainty, you're not sure where you're going, and then the composer brings that development to a beautiful, it kind of has its own logic. That process has its own logic, and it comes to an end, and then you find yourself in the recapitulation back where you started, and yet no longer not the same. Just like in T.S. Eliot's poem, you know, I can't remember the exact words, but that's a beautiful thing about, you know, the end of the journey, we find ourselves back where we started, and knowing the place for the first time. So that's sonata form, and in a pop song, it's very, very similar. You have your verse and chorus, and then you have your middle eight. which is the equivalent of the development section in sonata form, and then you go back out of the middle eight. And the middle eight should, in a pop song, should give you that same sense of having started here, you suddenly find yourself, oh, we're suddenly over there. It's somewhere different, and then you go back again. So I think that's how I see music. You know, music is very much for me an emotional journey, and music that doesn't touch my heart, I just won't listen to it again. You know, music for me should touch the heart and open the heart, actually. But it's not just a kind of like, in order that you just feel feelings, it's in this, it has this structure. So it's this synergy, it's the logic of the psyche and the logic of the heart that, you know, that you want to feel. If you go into a piece that makes you feel sad, by the end of the piece, you want to have some feeling of resolution.
Yes. Some
feeling of coming home. And, you know, I remember, I remember sitting at the end of hearing Mahler's Ninth Symphony, which I played a lot, actually, when I was in the LSO. And hearing it, you know, in a full hall in, I think it was in the Festival Hall in London, getting to the end of that piece, when this amazing slow movement at the end, very, very emotional, intense. And having this feeling of this is something related to death, you know, that the ending of this piece was related to dying, and he wrote it, you know, in his old age, and that everyone I had this feeling of everyone in the hall must be having some similar feeling. So it's also, I think, music, when you hear live music in a concert, there's this feeling of connection between the performers and the audience. And as a performer, you're always striving, or certainly I am, as a performer, you're striving to connect, to convey what you're feeling in the music so that the audience feels something similar, and everyone is united in some sense in that feeling.
I think that's fascinating. I was interested in a conversation I was having with a guy that you'll see in the next issue, Jeremy Rodell, who made a comment about Beethoven. You mentioned Beethoven, and he said that because Beethoven, as you know, produced the Ode to Joy, one of my favorite ever pieces of music, and he said that actually Beethoven didn't actually write much religious music, and in fact Beethoven was much more inclined to, or he was inclined into the Far Eastern aspect of religions, which is quite interesting with your connection.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, I didn't know. I had no idea. I hope he's right after telling everyone this, but I shall check it out. But it's an interesting idea. That I mean, I always thought, who cared about the Far East in 19th century Europe? It's amazing if he has taken that sort of interest. But I shall look that up, and I'd recommend that to our readers as well. Okay, just moving on a bit more to you. In your cover message, you refer to your experience with psychodynamic psychotherapy, which clearly made a significant impression on you, and perhaps even played a part in leading you into composing this particular concert. So what was the catalyst that led you to take psychodynamic psychotherapy, Steve? And can you describe what it is? I don't know what it is.
Right. Yes, I can give, I think, there's quite a lot to it, but I can give a core element of it, I think. So I was age about 28, I think, and I basically had a panic attack at work, and I was not sleeping. I was prone to anxiety at that stage in my life, but this was a kind of tipped me into a point that was, you know, not sustainable. So that's why.
Was there anything that triggered the panic attack?
Well, it was yes, it was something in my psyche.
Right. Okay.
So there was a pattern in my psyche where I found it hard to ask for help. So yes, there's an outward manifestation. There was a problem I had at work which I couldn't solve myself, and really all I needed to do was say to someone, I can't do this. But the pattern of my psyche at that point was such that I somehow felt I couldn't do that. So I bottled it all up inside. So the process of therapy of that kind, which is essentially Freudian, you know, based on Freudian theory, is that there are elements of your psyche, a word that seems to be coming up a lot. There are elements of your psyche which, as you're growing up, you basically disowned. So for me, that was anger and rage. So there were points in my growing up when I felt rage and anger, but it didn't feel safe. None of this is a conscious process. As you're just a child, and the psyche is just kind of doing its thing as it's growing up. It didn't feel safe to express it, so you repress it. That word's familiar with you. So there are structures in your psyche and your ego which are able to, as it were, shove these things under the carpet, and you don't know that that's happened, and you don't know that they're there. But later in your life, you might then experience symptoms which, if you understand the symptoms correctly, just as in a medical symptom, they point towards an origin in your psyche. So what happens with the therapist is, over a gradual process, they help you to re-own what you've disowned. And that's basically what it is. So I came to realize that I was capable of being angry, and more than that, I was actually capable of rather a scary rage, which you'd never think, would you, just talking to me now? But if you ask,
well, I'm glad we're online, just in case.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where it's much better to know that you are capable of these, what can be destructive emotions. They don't have to be destructive emotions. It's better to know that than to have them kind of creep up on you unawares.
Thank you, Steve. I did have another question for you connected with that, but I think you've answered it, and I'll summarize that later. But if I can just move on a little bit, you talk about narrow science and broad science, and it's interesting that narrow science describes the external physical world, whilst broad science deals with the inner subjective world. But aren't they one and the same thing in the end, and perhaps better described as the science we understand as against the science that we have yet to understand?
So these terms come
Perhaps
from
semantics.
Well, the terms come from Ken Wilber, and it was a revelation to me when I read them. He wrote about it in a book called The Marriage of Sense and Soul. So this is, I talked about earlier how he brought together psychology and spirituality in this integrated synthesis, and this is about integrating science and religion, which
sounds impossible.
It sounds absolutely, yeah, and I think 99.999% of people, not just humanists, would say that's impossible. So I would encourage humanists to read that book. It's fascinating. So what he's saying, Wilber, part of Wilber's model is the differentiation of the exterior world, so things I can touch, and see, and which is the area of what we think of as science. Science deals with stuff that you can touch and measure and so on. And then we have psychology, which we've been talking about just now, which is this interior, this slightly mysterious, perhaps, interior world, but seems to have its patterns, as we've been talking about. And it's so what Ken Wilber is saying is very useful to differentiate those, and actually they have been differentiated for going right back to Plato and Aristotle. I was just reading about it again last night, in terms of the good, the true, and the beautiful. Is that a trinity that you're familiar with?
I have heard it before, yes. But, yeah.
So the good being the realm of interpersonal relationship, and it's the realms of ethics and morals. So that as soon as you have a group of people gathered together, the question is, what is fair and just, and that's an area which obviously is very important for a humanist. Then the good, the true, and the beautiful. The true is the area of what we think of as science, and and it's about the objective world out there, things you can touch and measure and so on. And then the beautiful is the realm of art and aesthetics. And they each have their own validity claims. So you have this differentiation, and basically what Wilber is saying is that there is a science of that interior world, the subject, what we think of as the subjective world, my inner world. There is a science of that, just as there is a science, or we can apply scientific principles, let's put it that way, to that inner world. So the practice of meditation, as I was talking about before, and I was talking to my wife actually about this, who's a mindfulness teacher. I've also just trained to teach mindfulness. Mindfulness has become a very big thing in the West. Mindfulness is essentially a subset of Buddhist practice. So John Kabat-Zinn, who created mindfulness in the States, he was a Buddhist practitioner, and he saw the benefits of practicing meditation, which is mindfulness. It's being mindful of what's going on in your head and so on. And he created this course called mindfulness-based stress reduction. And that course, as a medical intervention, so to speak, has been researched enormously. I was asking my wife, there are thousands of research papers on the efficacy of that, doing that course and learning those practices. So, but that's research in the sense of narrow science. So well, actually, no, it's not, because what people are doing is they're asked to score their inner experience from perhaps 1 to 10 before they do the course, and in the middle, and at the end, and 6 months afterwards. So Wilber is saying you can view meditation practice as a scientific endeavor. You can approach it without any presumptions, but if you genuinely engage in it in a way that's skillful, in other words, it's not just kind of sitting down, and you have to kind of do it properly, as it were. You can see what happens and compare what happens in your own experience with the thousands of other people who've done the same practice. And as well as that, you can also, and this has been done as well, you can also at the same time apply narrow science. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but ECG scans have been done of experienced meditators. There are several experiments that have been done on this with Tibetan Buddhists, with a French man called Richker, I think, and he's a very experienced practitioner of meditation, and he was doing a particular meditation, and they were measuring his brain waves on the ECG machine, and they thought the machine was broken, and they repeated it. I don't know how, I want to read this, my wife was telling me about this. They repeated the experiment, and they were still convinced that the machine must be broken, because the results they were getting were just beyond anything that they'd ever seen before. So you have this sense with the practice of meditation that you can have your inner experience of you can measure your level of equanimity, your level of happiness, or and so on and so on. Lots, all sorts of kind of indices that you can decide to measure in your interior experience and compare those. And at the same time, if you can actually hook up to a brain scan and see that something's going on in your brain. So it's interesting when I did your quiz, of are you a humanist? Those 10 questions, and it seems a real shame to me that it reminded me of reading is it Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion? Mm-hmm. That
I read it years ago.
Yeah, that there are very different versions of spirituality. They're hugely different, and it seems really important for humanists to realize that there is a version of spirituality which you can approach as a rational, scientific endeavor, in a certain sense.
Well, thank you very much for that. I mean, one thing that's come through we're reaching the end of this interview now, but one thing that's come through to me listening to you is that the humanism experience and the spiritual experience, if you like, is a journey. It's not a thing in itself. It's a journey of discovery, and that's exactly the theme that I felt very strongly about Humanistically Speaking, about looking for a humanist point, a humanist fulcrum, if you like, to view the rest of the world and to reflect on ourselves. And I think this particular issue is going to be very, very important because we're dealing with something that humanists don't normally deal with, and we should address that. And I'd like to thank you very much for your candor and your honesty throughout this interview, Steve. It's been a real mind opener for me, and thank you very much. I'm looking forward very much to your concert, which is the Blue Pearl, a One World Oratorial world premiere, which is going to take place at St Giles Cripplegate in central London on May the 14th. Just one last question though. What do you hope the listener will get from listening to this music?
Well, I think one thing definitely, as we were talking about just a few minutes ago, I hope it will touch their hearts. You know, that is definitely one thing, and open their hearts. So, and also I think there's a particular way that silence is built into the structure of the music in the Blue Pearl Oratorio. So at various times in the journey of the music goes from kind of loudish or whatever, quite, you know, moving music, to stiller and quieter music, and then into silence, where the silence is not after the music has finished, but as it were, is part of the music. Yeah. And I hope that in those places, people will feel something profound. You know, what exactly that is for each person may be different, will be different, but I hope they will touch into something that has the feeling of something sacred, something beautiful, and also a sense of connection that we were talking about before. So the piece is called Blue Pearl because it's about the understanding that the earth is a unity, and also that humanity is a unity, that we're diverse, but with that, just like we were talking about earlier, with these unifying theories, that we are also all one in a very clear sense. And you don't have to have a kind of spiritual view to see that. You just have to go to the moon and take a picture of the earth. So I think those three things probably would be a brief summary. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what people actually do experience.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to hearing it. I shall be listening to the music, as will my wife, and I'm sure lots of the editors and the readers will. I hope some of the readers actually go to St Giles in Cripplegate.
That would be lovely. Yeah,
we'll certainly circulate this to our London humanists. So thank you so much, Steve. It's been a brilliant interview, and thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Now, just a closing message to the readers and to the people who are watching this. It seems to me that this concert will be a summary and an expression of a long and winding road that Steve has travelled through his life at this point. And I'm very much looking forward to listening to it online. I commend it to our readers. I would love to hear what you feel about the music. I'm sure Steve would, if you want to write into us. But do listen to it. Do come to the concert if you can. And I look forward very much to hearing your verdicts. Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
One word I learned of my birth. I've been waiting for this time to come. Seems we all are on the run. Who's giving chase? Where are you running?
Humanistically Speaking is a volunteer-run online publication slotting in the gap between National Humanist glossy magazines and Humanist UK's newsletter. We aim to create a platform that can bring humanist groups and individual humanists together, of course, but also to allow non-humanists to join in the debate. We want to explore topics of interest that any freethinker will be concerned about and offer informative, factual articles that encourage people to reflect upon, explore, question, and share ideas. We are in an exciting marketplace of ideas, and it is important that humanists from all stables of opinion have a voice. Humanistically Speaking is unique in offering this. Our remit is constantly developing, and by the start of our second year, we grew from a bi-monthly to a regular monthly issue. We've also expanded from email communication only to launching our own website and created our first values publication, From Atheism to Humanism. All of this has been made possible through your donations and your goodwill, and we're deeply grateful to those supporters among you who have donated already. But this is just the beginning. Our aim is a bold one. In addition to offering our support to National Secular Society and Humanist UK's campaign objectives, we want to share the humanist idea with everyone in society. Naturally, we want to celebrate rational thinking, open inquiry, compassion, fairness and justice, but we want to balance these good things with enjoyment and having fun, a sense of comradeship, and the thrill of just being alive. But to go further, we need financial security, and we're asking you to help us. If you approve of what we're doing, please join us on our journey towards the foundation of a national humanist magazine that lends voice to every rational and respectful opinion. We want to explain and celebrate what humanism is and share humanist ideas that we believe can do so much to improve the way we all live. You can help us to achieve these aims by setting up a standing order of £4 a month or whatever you can afford to Humanistically Speaking, or if you're not able to do that, think about giving us a kickstart boost by donating a one-off lump sum of perhaps £20. Our bank details are at the bottom of this screen, but if you prefer, please click on the link below that will take you straight to the appropriate place on our Humanistically Speaking website and follow the guidance given. Every donation will be acknowledged with a message of thanks from us. One last thing before you go, do spread the word with your friends, because Humanistically Speaking is there for everyone. There are also many potential humanists out there who already share our values and yet don't know we exist. There are also humanists who don't have a group nearby and who might be feeling like a lone voice in their communities. We would like to serve them also and play our part in breaking down any sense of isolation. We're doing all we can by committing our time and energy. Please help us with your goodwill and donations and join us on this journey. Thank you.